Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
I cannot see vacation travel this summer from the U.S.
Staying put, borders unlikely to reopen as health officials urge continued vigilance. Also,
the rivers are not safe, the streams are not safe.
Water levels rising, almost half of BC on flood watch, and
so the market is really good. It is definitely a seller's market right now.
real estate boon. Home buyers eager to get back into the market.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
good evening. Thanks for joining us. Another 6 people have died from the coronavirus in BC in the past 3 days. However, there are only 31 new confirmed cases in total since Friday.
And today, an update on how the Black Lives Matter protests have affected the province's case counts. Our Tanya Fletcher is live now with more on this. And Tanya, we're now learning there have been no cases connected to those demonstrations?
Yeah, that's right. The province tracks every single case, and so far not one has been linked to those recent protests. So why is that? Well, the credit goes to a combination of things, according to the provincial health officer. They were outside for short periods of time, for one, and most kept their distance and wore a mask. Now, it's interesting to note how protest settings here have differed from beach settings in parts of the U.S., where parties have resumed and case counts have gone up.
When you're partying, dancing, laughing, kissing, hugging, those are the situations that you're much more likely to spread droplets between people. So there's something inherently different about what you're doing with a group of people partying on a beach versus what we've been seeing with some of these protests. And that was surprising.
Now, Dr. Bonnie Henry says it goes back to the 3 C's of transmission: being in close contact for a continuous time in a closed environment. As she adds, that 15 minutes is the general time threshold for the virus to take hold between people in close quarters, and that's why it's highly unlikely that you'd contract the virus from someone, say, running beside you on the seawall.
All right, so Tanya, so no cases connected to the recent protests here. What about connected to Americans traveling here? We've been hearing quite a bit of concern from British Columbians about that.
No, none of those either, at least that Dr. Henry is aware of. So you'll know that there have been anecdotes of some Americans, skirting the rules, perhaps finding loopholes in the system by getting through the border, saying they need to drive to Alaska, for example. But Dr. Henry says there's been no evidence of the virus being transmitted from any of those situations, which are minimal. Still, with the worsening situation stateside, yes, she doesn't see the Canada-U.S. border opening to what she calls vacation travel at any point this summer, given the widespread transmission of the virus there. And Health Minister Adrian Dix agrees.
It's important to remember it's not just the issue of people visiting Canada. It's Canadians visiting the United States that would be not possible at this point. Many of the places we would visit, Washington and Oregon, are obvious, but also Arizona, Nevada, and California. These are states where Canadians and British Columbians visit frequently. And clearly, the trend line is entirely in the opposite direction.
And he adds it's critical for our whole continent, not just the U.S., but Mexico too, to start seeing positive trends as part of these discussions about loosening border restrictions continue. Mike Lien.
All right, Tanya Fletcher reporting live tonight. Thanks. And Vancouver Coastal Health is warning patrons of the Hotel Belmont Bar and Nightclub about possible COVID-19 exposure. It happened both Saturday, June 27th and Monday, June 29th. People who tested positive for COVID-19 visited the Hotel Belmont on those 2 nights. As a precaution, anyone else who was there on June 27th and 29th needs to monitor themselves for 14 days. If they remain healthy and do not develop symptoms, they won't need to self-isolate and can continue with their usual daily routine. But if they develop any symptoms of COVID-19, they are advised to please seek COVID-19 testing and immediately self-isolate.
An ICBC road test for most drivers will officially restart on July 20th, but it won't be open season on bookings. There's a 55,000 test backlog to work through first.
My advice to drivers is, or prospective drivers, be ready for your test because you will get the test as scheduled in priority for those who had exams. But if you fail that test, you will have a significant wait.
Drivers whose tests were canceled in March will be given priority, and then April, and so on. Everyone taking those tests will be given a medical-grade mask, while examiners will wear a mask, gloves, and a face shield or goggles. ICBC is opening an online booking tool and a new call center so drivers won't have to book in person. It's also training new examiners and looking into new testing centers to help deal with the backlog. A variety of other non-commercial road tests also restart between now and July 20th.
Over the last few months, the COVID-19 pandemic nearly brought the real estate market to a standstill.
Now, after months of low sales and fewer listings, the industry is finally back, particularly in the Fraser Valley. And as Joel Ballard reports, it's rebounding with a bang.
With Daniel Planko's mother preparing to move into a care home, the family was eager to sell her large house in Cloverdale until COVID-19 chilled the real estate market in March.
When we were ready, it was the middle of the lockdown. Stay at home was the messaging we were getting, so we just stayed at home.
But as the province gradually reopened, Planko knew it was time to hop back in and try to sell the house. And it seems he's not alone. In May, 805 homes were sold in the Fraser Valley, while in June, that number more than doubled with 1,718 sales. That's a 113% jump between the 2 months, according to the Fraser Valley Real Estate Board. Surprising numbers even to those in the industry.
It's never happened in the board's history that we've had an increase of that much from 1 month to another, from 1 May to 1 June.
Shields says it all comes down to 3 factors: low interest rates, pent-up demand, and buyers and sellers who are feeling a bit more comfortable operating in a post-COVID-19 market.
During the lockdown period with COVID-19, there were a lot of people that had been planning on buying or selling and put their plans on hold. And what we've seen, because we were deemed an essential service, were really only those people that had to buy or had to sell were coming out into the marketplace during those months.
Surrey realtor Lucky Gill agrees the real estate market has completely turned around since the beginning of the pandemic.
So the market is really good. It is definitely a seller's market right now. We have seen an increased demand from the buyer's end, so we have a lot of organic multiple offer situations that are happening.
And while it may seem like the perfect time to dive in, Gill is still urging some caution.
Any buyer that's entering into the market, I would say they need to do all their homework and making sure that, the financial stability, job security, everything's there. They need to do their due diligence and before entering into the market. It's a calculated risk.
Still, Planko says he's optimistic that now is the right time to sell the house and help his mother downsize. Joel Ballard, CBC News, Surrey.
High water levels are keeping much of BC on flood watch tonight. Mudslides, washouts, and road closures hit many rural communities over the weekend.
BC's River Forecast Centre has issued flood warnings for large areas along our province's major rivers, including the Fraser and South and North Thompson rivers. With flood warnings and advisories up for about half of BC, a warning from the Public Safety Minister.
People need to stay away. The rivers are not safe, the streams are not safe, and people need to stay away from these areas.
Areas like Cache Creek, where about a dozen properties along the swollen Bonaparte River were ordered evacuated last night. The order coming after an evacuation alert was issued Saturday night, which affected about 300 homes. A massive mudslide in the McBride area east of Prince George forced residents to scramble from their homes in the Michelle Raymond made it out safely with her pets, but is now worried about a second slide.
It's quite devastating. I've seen pictures of my property. I have no yard. My house is still there, still okay, but with this other slide coming down, we don't really know what's going to happen.
To the south, BC's River Forecast Centre has issued a high stream flow advisory for the lower Fraser River from Hope to the ocean. Peak water levels are expected at Mission by tomorrow.
Now let's talk a little bit more about that forecast, and she's back. Johanna Wagstaffe, very nice to have you return from maternity leave, but we are keeping you busy. So Joe, what are you watching for in terms of rain and floods?
Yeah, nice to be back, but it's a busy one. Don't let
the blue skies behind me fool you. We're actually in a very unstable environment. You can almost see those cumulus starting to form on the North Shore. The real moisture is bubbling up right now in the interior for those hardest hit areas. I want to take you to the satellite and radar where you can see thunderstorm watches are in place right now for the BC interior for many of those places under not only the flood watches and warnings along the Fraser River, but also the evacuation alerts. And you can see those intense lightning strikes and those more intense yellows and reds in the radars. That's where we could be looking at 15 to 25 millimeters of rain. So the situation could definitely get worse before it gets better. Just taking you through the next 24 hours, that moisture will continue through the overnight. Vancouver, we may see the edge of the next band move in for tomorrow morning for just a few showers, but generally we seem to miss the worst of the moisture as that low pressure basically pinwheels in bands of showers. So for tomorrow, looking to see that rain for the interior continuing through Wednesday. It's not until Thursday that we'll see a break for those hardest hit areas. And it is really the Fraser River and all of the tributaries running high from the north all the way through to the mouth where it exits in Richmond. Record levels for this time of the year. For Metro Vancouver, again, those scattered showers tomorrow morning, definitely a possibility, taking you down to a 14 tonight, back up to a 19 tomorrow. That's pretty much where we got to today, seeing some nice lingering sun from that well-deserved weekend. Highs back up to that 19. I'll take you through the return of the rain for Metro Vancouver and when we can see summer again, because I know it hasn't been a sure bet so far. All those details coming up.
All right, Joe, thanks. Talk to you again in a bit. Richmond RCMP have found the body of a young man who went missing last night in the Fraser River. An extensive search began after police got a call at about 9:30 of a man in the water off Pier 73 near Richmond's Pacific Gateway Hotel. Witnesses told the RCMP Corey Nagata jumped in to retrieve a football but could not get back to the dock. Two men jumped in to help but weren't able to rescue him. Nagata's body was found just before noon today. He was just 24 years old.
BC's Return It Recycling program is making changes to lower the risk of COVID-19 for their workers. They're introducing reverse vending machines and automated sorting technologies at some depots. They're also launching a 6-month pilot program so you can return all aluminum beverage containers without having to sort them. Right now, people have to separate their alcohol and non-alcohol cans because the material is managed by 2 different agencies.
First Nations people in BC have been disproportionately affected by the opioid epidemic. New numbers show First Nations have experienced overdose deaths 5 times more than other British Columbians.
And as our Briar Stewart tells us, there are some particular challenges made worse during the COVID-19 pandemic.
I've had family members that have passed away because they can't use with their friends.
Chris Livingstone works on Vancouver's downtown east side. On June 21st, while he was helping out at an event for National Indigenous Peoples Day, he discovered his sister Rhonda was alone and using.
I feel terrible because I was celebrating and we were doing naloxone trainings. My sister was overdosing in a hotel by herself.
COVID-19 has meant that some overdose prevention sites have been scaled back, and health officials say more people are using alone on the streets or in their rooms. The drug supply has also been disrupted. Experts say it's now more toxic.
You know, people really stood up and got behind the public health measures for COVID-19. And because that's an infectious disease, but when it comes to the ongoing opioid crisis, that has all kinds of other, stigmas associated with it.
First Nations people make up just over 3% of the province's population, but account for more than 16% of illicit drug deaths. Between January and May, 89 people identifying as First Nations died from overdoses, a 93% increase over the same period last year.
You are taking a risk, any which way you look at it.
Melissa Steinhauer is an outreach worker and struggles with addiction. She was relieved to finally have access to prescription drugs through a new provincial program, but it was short-lived. She was cut off after she missed 2 days of daily pickups.
Because I went to 3 different places till I finally got what I needed to get onto Safe Supply, and then got it taken away.
She wishes it was easier to get access to a safe supply because now, like so many others, she's back to getting her drugs off the street. Briar Stewart, CBC News, Vancouver.
Well, getting outside might just be the ideal pandemic pastime right now. And what better way than heading out to the Fraser Valley to pick berries?
Yeah, but even the world of you pick berries has been affected by COVID-19. As Deborah Goebel reports tonight, farmers have had to implement safety protocols, including physical distancing.
The raspberries do grow at different periods.
Row upon row of newly ripened berries just waiting to be picked.
So I love raspberries. They are my favorite fruit.
But despite acres of outdoor open space, COVID-19 has even impacted the U-Pick berry farms here in the Fraser Valley.
For U-Pick, I think people really appreciated the rules because then people want to know, how am I going to feel safe?
Here at the Mon Farm in Abbotsford, there's still lots of U-Pickers.
It seems pretty good. Everyone's spaced out really well.
Did you pick all those?
Yeah. You did?
Yeah. This is 2-year-old Thor's first time. His technique? See a berry? Pick a berry.
Look at all these ones, buddy.
I would too.
On weekends, the crowds come, but there's no bringing your own bucket, and you're not supposed to eat the berries right off the bush. That's a tough one to police.
I ate some.
The hardest part was trying not to eat them all.
Man Farms actually has a really good policy around COVID, so you can book a time slot, and during that, and then they assign you some aisles, so nobody else is in the aisles with you.
Learning how to adapt has been a challenge this year, but farmers are used to handling whatever comes at them. It's what took this farm from a small roadside stand to an 80-acre diversified business.
We all have different parts of the business, so we're pretty good at coming up with new ideas, and maybe that's from my parents. They're immigrants, so that was instilled in us to be resourceful. But yeah, the diversification definitely does help us to, have some strategy involved in how we're going to make up for lost income.
There's been some heavy lifting.
Good 10 pounds in there.
Strawberries and raspberries don't wait for anyone. They don't care that the coronavirus is happening or that there's a pandemic. They're going to grow.
It's also been more difficult to get farm workers this year, but farmers have a lot of experience rolling with whatever gets thrown at them.
I think 2020 will be all right. I think definitely not the best years in our books, but it'll be okay.
Deborah Goebel, CBC News, Abbotsford.
Definitely a fun activity during COVID times.
Yes. Well, two things. I definitely want some raspberries right now. Maybe a little shortbread and, a little whipped cream. That would be nice. But yeah, physical distancing, whether it's in the grocery store or out there at the U-Pick.
Yeah, no kidding. All right, a reminder, you can watch this newscast live on the free CBC Gem app.
And CBC Vancouver is also on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. You can follow both of us and Johanna on Instagram and Twitter as well. Hundreds of scientists say COVID-19 is airborne, and they want the WHO to revise its recommendations. What it means for your health right after the break.
And thanks for staying with us online during the TV commercial break. The travel and tourism industries have been badly damaged by the coronavirus pandemic. One city that relies very heavily on foreign visitors has been hit especially hard.
Back in November, devastating floods drove the tourists out of Venice. Then COVID-19 kept them away. Well, now many in the city say it's time to diversify the economy and try to make it stronger. And as Megan Williams explains, one solution for the future of Venice may be in its past.
Even with no passengers, gondolas still need care. Lorenzo della Tofola and his son Alberto are among the few still using centuries-old building and repair techniques. But he says he fears without government investment in Venice's rich and varied artisanal workshops, the old knowledge is destined to disappear. Laura Scarpa runs a network that promotes Venetian artisans and artists. She says for the fragile city to become resilient during crisis, it has to diversify its economy and invest in artisans who once were the pulse of Venice.
If you save an artisan, you're saving the traditions and the culture.
The Bottega Artigiana is a place where the community stick around, and a lot of other people are involved in the work of the artisan.
Like this 200-year-old silk weaving workshop that sells its exquisite textiles to clients around the world, including the White House.
It's important because thousands of people works in this activity, and now we are the last.
It's gone from a bustling 3-story operation a century ago to just 7 weavers now, mostly young and determined to pass the knowledge on. Like Valeria Boncompagno, who became a goldsmith after her family sold handmade jewelry for more than a century. She gives free workshops in schools and works in her shop so people can see the craft is still alive.
The shop shows the piece handed, but not the work behind, which is the most beautiful thing. So that's why I decided to put my bench here, and the work needs to be shown because it's the message.
The message that Venice's artisanal traditions, which have given so much to the world, continue to give meaning and life to those who live here. Megan Williams, CBC News, Venice.
And the most famous art museum in the world reopened today. It had been closed for 4 months as France tried to limit the spread of coronavirus.
Well, not the usual huge throngs waiting to get into the Louvre in Paris. There were still lineups. The number of people allowed inside is being limited, down from 50,000 a day in midsummer to just 7,000. Reservations are required, and visitors must wear masks and follow a guided path through the building. Might actually make for a better experience, I think.
Maybe, yeah. We were there last year and we didn't get into the Louvre. Too big a lineup.
Oh, see, we got in.
So I'll have to go back.
We got in, but it was busy.
When your backyard is burning, is anywhere safe? I'm Adrienne Lamb, the host of a new podcast, World on Fire. Join us on the front lines of wildfires burning around the world. Find it wherever you get your podcasts.
COVID-19 infections continue to spiral out of control south of the border, despite mounting concerns. The pace of new cases in the U.S. remains faster than ever, with more than 40,000 positive tests a day. Thankfully, the trend so far in deaths continue to mirror the rosier picture weeks ago when the curve was more flat. As Paul Hunter shows us, that's the picture the White House is emphasizing.
It would seem a fairly easy to accomplish imperative to help slow the spread of the coronavirus in the U.S. Wear a mask. And indeed, lots of Americans are. But millions are not. And they're congregating, spreading the virus, worsening the crisis in this country daily. This past holiday weekend, merely an extreme example of what plays out here regularly. So, does catastrophe now loom?
I'd say we're pretty close. I do anticipate that after this weekend's parties, we're going to see a bump.
And consider that in those states where COVID has lately been spiking, Texas, for example, hospitals are already near capacity. And yet, in Florida, where a man dressed as the Grim Reaper marched along busy beaches, signaling people should take more care, pushback.
Take that off. If you will, take that off.
On the aversion to self-protection, many point to the example set by Donald Trump, who not only doesn't wear one, but this weekend said, with increased testing lately,
we show cases, 99% of which are totally harmless.
That's close to the survival rate, but ignores the roughly 20% of cases bad enough to need hospital care, said Trump's press secretary today.
The president was noting the fact that the vast majority of Americans who contract coronavirus will come out on the other side of this.
In New York, meanwhile, where following strict guidelines turned things around, they're now well into reopening. Today, a call for Trump to emphasize COVID is a very serious problem.
If he does not acknowledge that, then he is facilitating the virus.
And goes the thinking contributing to more COVID illness and death in a country already leading the world in both. Paul Hunter, CBC News, Washington.
And scientists from around the world, including Canada, say there is now enough evidence that COVID-19 is airborne, that the WHO should change its guidelines. But as Vicadopia tells us, other researchers disagree.
Thousands of droplets fly through the air with every cough, the most common way for the coronavirus to infect others. But there are also microscopic particles, smaller than droplets, that can remain airborne, floating around for several hours, released by just talking or breathing. In an open letter to the WHO, scientists warn that's why hand washing and physical distancing aren't enough to stop the outbreak.
If you do not block all the routes of transmission well, or if you do not block them efficiently, what you're going to see is that flattening the curve will be extremely slow.
Point to an outbreak in this choir in March as one example of a super spreading event where one person infected dozens of others. The WHO has downplayed the risk of airborne particles because not enough is known about how infectious they are. But experts in fluid mechanics say the WHO's understanding of the subject is decades out of date, as the emerging science doesn't even draw a distinction between droplets and airborne particles.
It is stuck in a nomenclature that is rooted in science of the 1930s, the physics of the process that have been observed, measured, modeled, and validated.
The letter calls for better ventilation, asking that the WHO urge governments to mandate upgrades before allowing reopenings, especially in schools, workplaces, and seniors' homes, where lots of people congregate, though not everyone agrees it's urgent.
You need to focus on the certainties and spend less time and energy focusing on the things that might have some impact but do not appear to be as important.
One of those certainties is the continued use of masks, as well as the need for vigilance. Vicadopia, CBC News, Toronto.
And medical trials on a possible COVID-19 treatment promoted by U.S. President Donald Trump have been stopped. Hydroxychloroquine showed little improvement for hospitalized patients. But as Jayla Bernstein reports, it's just one of many treatments being explored.
At Montreal's McGill University Health Centre, a team of experts is trying to figure out how to save patients with COVID-19. And Dr. Matthew Cheng is glad his team is finished with hydroxychloroquine.
It wasn't successful a bit. It didn't show any marked improvement. There were also some potential safety concerns, and so we'd rather move on.
Cheng felt the politicization of that treatment was counterproductive.
Because if there wasn't such a political undercurrent that would push people to take hydroxychloroquine, we could have completed these trials much faster. We would have answers much sooner. We could then move on to the next generation of treatment trials that actually have a hope of helping people.
Now his team is adapting their trial to try new medication.
So we're going to be adding 2 new agents that we're very excited about. The first of which is remdesivir, which is a nucleoside analog. It's basically an antiviral that helps stop the virus from replicating in the body. And the second agent is interferon beta, which is an agent that really helps balance the immune system to make sure that it doesn't go into overdrive.
While hundreds of possible treatments are being researched around the world, research into possible vaccines continues as well, including one already approved for human trials in Canada. Earlier this week, the U.S. National Institute of Health director said a vaccine could be developed by the end of this year.
By early 2021, 300 million doses of a vaccine.
In general, vaccines take at least 10 years to go through this development process. But because COVID-19 is such a relentless spreading disease with incredibly high numbers, once there's a vaccine candidate, that testing will be able to be done a lot more quickly than it would ever have been done before.
Still, there's a lot of work to do between finding a successful vaccine and mass producing it. And of course, there's the matter of making sure that people are willing to roll up their sleeves. Jayla Bernstein, CBC News, Montreal.
Canadians continue to look nervously south of the border, but some Americans are feeling the impact of COVID-19 more than others. The inequity of the virus, next.
We'd
like you to meet a remarkable man who never went to school, started work in a lumber camp at the tender age of 6, and who's been swinging a double-edged axe since before the turn of the century, down the decades and right up to the present day. He's been happily chopping and carving through wars, disasters, 6 reigns, and all the years of peace. Reporter Mac Reimel visited the old sculptor and found him still hacking away.
On the beach, a few miles past Gibson's on the Sunshine Coast, an old man, a couple of young assistants, and a giant cedar log, the studio of Dudley Carter.
How deep in here? Is that angle okay?
If anyone should know about logs, it's Dudley Carter. Back in 1897, when he was 6 years old, he went to work in a lumber camp. Never really went to school.
6 years when I started greasing skids, but there was no schools. I didn't go to school. There was no schools. All my experience has been self-taught in both the sculpture and the engineering, reporting on forest, and all that.
By the 40s and 50s, Carter was well known in the U.S., well enough known to appear 3 times in a Diego Rivera mural. That's him with the axe and in the check shirts. Well known in the States, but not among Canadians. All the same, he went on carving. Totems, Yule posts, Haida houses. People driving through Gibson see his big bird, still only partly finished. Partly finished, not because the 94-year-old man lacks energy, but because he's got too many projects on the go. This log he's carving is to be the figurehead of a sculpted boat, which becomes a restaurant on Fisherman's Wharf in Santa Cruz, California. But he is 94, so how much longer can he work?
How much longer I'm going to do sculpture?
Yeah.
Why, I don't see that I've ever go there quick. I just figure on keeping going. Like somebody asked me, what about my will? What am I going to who am I going to leave my tools to and my equipment? I always tell them I'm not going to leave them to anybody. I'm going to take it with me.
And that's Saturday Report for this week. We'll be back next week, but join us later tonight for the National. For CBC News, I'm George McLean.
This is CBC.
Some of the stories we're following tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
The rivers are not safe, the streams are not safe, and people need to stay away from these areas.
A warning from BC's Public Safety Minister tonight as high water levels are keeping much of BC on flood watch. Mudslides, washouts, and road closures hit many rural communities on the weekend. BC's River Forecast Centre has issued flood warnings for large areas along the province's major rivers, including the Fraser and South and North Thompson.
We're very encouraged by what we've seen in June. Like I said earlier, we cannot predict the future, but what we do know, at least for now, is that the market is stable.
And it's growing. New numbers from the Fraser Valley Real Estate Board show home sales are increasing slowly again. Sales in Surrey, Delta, and the Valley are picking up faster than in Greater Vancouver. Some realtors say it's a seller's market and they're seeing homes with multiple offers. Low interest rates, pent-up demand, and buyers adapting to new COVID measures are some of the reasons why.
I cannot see vacation travel this summer from the U.S., given the rates that we're seeing and how widespread it is in the U.S. right now.
BC's top doctor says it is unlikely the border will be reopening to U.S. vacation travelers anytime soon. Several recent cases of COVID-19 in Canada have been linked to the U.S. Dr. Bonnie Henry also announced 31 new COVID cases in our province since Friday and 6 new deaths.
The death toll from COVID-19 in the U.S. is already equal to the terrorist attack of 9/11, 40 times over.
And if some seem unable to reckon with that loss or the threat of more, Susan Ormiston shows us this virus has been masked by inequality and fueled by division.
Behind the statistics are families, some Americans bearing more of a burden than others. As President Trump tries to diminish the toll still rising, loved ones are being mourned, stolen too soon. Cynthia Watson was 64. She worked at the Pentagon once before a stroke put her in a nursing home. In just 2 weeks, she went from the home to a DC hospital and died there. We met her daughter Lakeisha at the funeral home.
She was very young, a loving, kind, caring person. Due to COVID, COVID had to take her away from us, and we just heartbroken. And just praying for the rest of the people out in the community that we don't lose any more life, because I don't want nobody to ever have to experience what I went through. It's so heartbroken.
We're all in this together, so the saying goes, but the toll in the U.S. is not equally shared. 1 in 3 Black Americans know someone who's died of COVID-19, compared to 1 in 10 white Americans. Pandemic deaths dog Trump's leadership. His playing down the persistence of the virus in favor of opening up the economy has cost him. His predictions were skewed from the start. February 26th.
When you have 15 people, and the 15 within a couple of days is going to be down to close to zero, that's a pretty good job we've done.
February 28th.
35,000 people on average die each year from the flu. Did anyone know that? 35,000. That's a lot of people.
The coronavirus has killed close to 4 times as many.
And you wonder, the press is in hysteria mode. CNN, fake news, and their camera just went off.
But by end of March, no more smiles.
What do you say to Americans who are watching you right now who are scared?
I say that you're a terrible reporter. That's what I say. Go ahead.
I
think it's a very nasty question, and I think it's a very bad signal that you're putting out to the American people.
Unfortunately, we have a president in this country who governs by polarization, by confrontation, by accusation of conspiracies and of enemies, and he decided to go with the polarizing narrative about this pandemic.
Trump has made not wearing a mask a sign of independence, even blind loyalty at a densely packed rally.
I don't think we're going to be able to escape this polarized framework in which wearing a mask has become a political statement as to which side you're on.
Long before Donald Trump got to the White House, Theodore Gaffney was there as a press photographer.
He was on the first Black American to go on the White House to take pictures.
Maria Santos Gaffney is his wife.
And then he got involved in the Freedom Riders as a publication journalist.
The Freedom Riders rode buses into the segregated South in 1961, and Gaffney took pictures. He became a civil rights activist, but didn't live long enough to see this spring's revolution for justice. In early April, he got sick. He wouldn't eat or drink.
That's when he took to George Washington Hospital, and a couple hours later, they told him he had COVID-19, and he never came out.
He and Maria had met in her home, Brazil, a May-December romance. They married for 31 years, living in Washington, until COVID took him.
And tell people at the time, this virus is killing fast, especially the elderly folks. He was 92 years old. He didn't have a chance with the virus.
And Maria, he was 92, but you say he was very active.
Very active. Mm-hmm. He would drive every time I need to go somewhere. Because he's 92, doesn't mean undeserving life like everybody else. I went to the hospital. I looked at him through the window in his room. I watched him in pain. That was not a pretty sight to see somebody you love in pain. And be able to breathe on his own, to be able to talk, nothing like that. It was not fun to watch somebody die, especially because of COVID-19. Do not tell me because he's 92, I should accept that he died of COVID-19. I was expecting him to live a lot longer. to stay with me because we've been together for so long. He lost his life, and I'm the biggest loser because I don't have him anymore.
In the end, the coronavirus is not buried. Pandemic politics, which propelled states to reopen, now present new deaths and leave behind newly bereaved.
What do you want to tell people, Keisha?
Stay social distance, wear your mask, don't have a large gathering, and take this serious because it don't become serious to some when they hit their family, and we don't want to ever have to bury another family member or another person in the world because we care about the people that's dying. I watch the numbers and I care about those as well. I just hope that and pray that they can find a vaccination for it so that everybody can stop dying.
Sadly, in 2020, saying goodbye is all too frequent. Susan Ormiston, CBC News, Washington.
Well, it's a warning to travelers. Exercise caution due to frequent violent actions by law enforcement. The surprise twist? It's China warning its citizens about Canada. The latest salvo in an escalating diplomatic row next.
And it's 6:39. You're looking at a live shot of downtown Vancouver. Very crane-filled skies there, but it is a beautiful afternoon on the south coast. Will it last? Johanna is back from maternity leave, and she'll have the forecast next. Japan has issued its highest level emergency warning for continuing heavy rain across much of the country's southwest.
Flooding and landslides have claimed 41 lives over the weekend, 14 of them in a nursing home. Some residents are still missing after several homes and other structures were destroyed by mudslides or rising river water. Japan's prime minister has called on military personnel and rescue workers to step up their search for survivors. Officials are advising remaining residents to move to sturdier buildings or head for the upper floors of their own homes.
The floods are Japan's worst natural disaster since a typhoon last October left about 90 people dead.
All right, let's bring in Johanna Wagstaffe. She's back. Obviously, we're keeping an eye on our flooding situation here, not as dire as it is in Japan, but we're definitely keeping an eye on it.
That's right. Yeah, we are also watching for the washouts and the mudslides that we saw over the weekend. Really hard to tell that story with the blue sky behind me, but this is actually just a break between the pinwheels that are wrapping moisture in across the province, and we're watching for one of those to clip us tomorrow morning. What a beautiful day, though, spilling out after such a gorgeous and much-deserved weekend. I know it's been a slow start to summer. We've been in a bit of a blocking pattern. If you've been wondering where our traditional July is, we're using that word Julyuary, extending it from Junary, meaning that the east has been under that big high pressure ridge and the west has really been under these series of low pressures. Things are going to change, though. Let me start you off with our temperatures across the country. Just below seasonal today, hitting the 20-degree mark at YVR and high teens for much of the rest of Metro Vancouver. I want to show you the bigger picture, though, talking about that blocking pattern. Central and eastern Canada have been under extended heat warnings for almost a week now, just as we've been under those cool and showery conditions. That's as that jet stream dives down across the west and then rises high across the east. And that's the pattern that has been our story for the past couple of days. Heat will return to the west and things will cool off on the east as we get that ridge shifting. Let me show you what that looks like for Metro Vancouver. We've got, again, those few showers we're watching in the forecast for tomorrow morning. They'll come sort of pre-dawn hours as I take you through the forecast. You can see just a slight risk early hours. We might get clipped, although some models showing us staying dry. So just a heads up, early hours, we might see a few of those showers. Clearing out as we head into the afternoon tomorrow, though. And then look at this, Wednesday also looking fairly clear. Not a lot of confidence in the models, I've got to say. Temperatures tomorrow, much more confidence in that. High 20s for parts of the interior. A little chillier up towards the north, but generally temperatures are about seasonal. Get through to the Wednesday, that's probably our best day this week. Temperatures still just a couple degrees below that seasonal mark. Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, back to showery weather, but high pressure is building. And by the time we hit next week, I think that's where summer's been hiding.
Oh, well, that'll be nice, so we don't have to use Julyuary, I think you call it. Okay. Thanks, Joe. Well, China is lashing out at Canada, cautioning Ottawa not to interfere with its new security law in Hong Kong.
Beijing today also told Chinese citizens to exercise caution in traveling to Canada. It follows Ottawa's decision last week to suspend its extradition treaty with Hong Kong and Canada's updated travel warning about an increased risk of arbitrary detention in the former British colony.
Patrick Falk has more from Beijing.
The Ministry of Foreign Affairs did say today that it reserved the right to take action following Canada's move, and that's exactly what China's done with this travel advisory, saying that law enforcement agencies were frequently carrying out violent actions and that people needed to take precautions. This was what had triggered several demonstrations, they say.
Clearly, there is no basis for that whatsoever. Canada's a safe country with the rule of law, and we welcome people from China to come here for tourism, study, and business.
A lot of the other things that we heard from the foreign ministry today didn't come as a surprise. These were really things that China's repeated many times before, basically telling Canada to keep its nose out of Hong Kong's affairs. He said once again that China reserved the right to retaliate, and that there was an article in the Global Times published yesterday saying that Canada's meddling in Hong Kong may backfire on the economy, and China's made threats related to trade, not just Canada, but also India and Australia and other countries in recent days. And one wonders whether or not that bargaining chip really carries the same sort of weight. And this sort of retaliation that we've seen just in the last few hours is suggestive in many ways, because certainly in this sort of environment, you can't imagine that would have any immediate impact to Canada having some sort of travel advisory against it. And also, you must imagine that Ottawa is already re-evaluating to an extent whether it's worth the price it pays for keeping its trade ties intact with China.
And that story from Patrick Falk in Beijing. The Canadian Forces member arrested last week on the grounds of Rideau Hall in Ottawa had multiple firearms and threatened the Prime Minister. Court documents say 46-year-old Corey Hearn of Manitoba threatened to cause death or bodily harm to Justin Trudeau. They further claim the guns he had were loaded. They included 2 shotguns, a rifle, a revolver considered a restricted firearm, and a prohibited high-capacity magazine. RCMP were able to intercept Hearn only after he rammed the property gates and made his way on foot toward the Trudeau residence. The motive for the incident has not been outlined, but an RCMP national security team is leading the investigation. Hearn remains in custody with his next court appearance set for July 17th. And in New York, a white Canadian woman is being charged with falsely accusing a black man of threatening her life. Amy Cooper was seen on cell phone video recorded by Christian Cooper on Memorial Day. The two are not related. Mr. Cooper is a bird watcher who asked Miss Cooper to leash her dog, as is the law. She objected and phoned 911, telling the operator he was threatening her life. The exchange went viral, seen by as many people as an illustration of how black people are falsely reported to the police. The Manhattan DA says Amy Cooper is charged with filing a false report, a misdemeanor punishable by up to a year in jail.
This is the 7th anniversary of the rail disaster in Lac-Mégantic, Quebec, and a new memorial was dedicated in the town today.
48 silhouettes étoilées en hommage aux 47 victimes et une en hommage à la communauté marquée par la tragédie.
47 people were killed and the center of the town was destroyed when a runaway train carrying crude oil derailed and exploded. The memorial space took 3 years to create and build. It is on the former site of a cafe in the heart of the town. Most of the victims were staff and patrons of the cafe.
Fans and loved ones are grieving the loss of Canadian Broadway actor Nick Cordero, who died after coronavirus-related complications. The Tony Award-nominated actor died yesterday in Los Angeles. He had been in hospital for over 90 days, on a ventilator for weeks, and his family was looking into a double lung transplant. Cordero grew up in Hamilton's West End and attended Toronto's Ryerson University for acting. He was known for his roles in Rock of Ages, Waitress, and A Bronx Tale, the musical. He leaves behind his wife Amanda and 1-year-old son Elvis. Nick Cordero was 41 years old.
And world-renowned movie music composer Ennio Morricone has died. Morricone famously wrote the score for the 1966 Clint Eastwood film The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. More than 2 decades later, he scored Cinema Paradiso and The Mission. Over his career, he composed hundreds of tunes for film, television, popular songs, and orchestras, winning Oscars, Golden Globes, Grammys, and more. In 2016, he won his 2nd Oscar for the score of the movie The Hateful Eight. Morricone died overnight at a clinic in Rome after breaking his thigh bone 10 days ago. He wrote his own death notice, bidding goodbye to his beloved wife and asking for a private funeral so as not to disturb others. Ennio Morricone was 91.
Well, he's just 10 days old and in what can be considered at the Vancouver Aquarium's NICU. The backstory behind this baby otter next.
I'm CBC journalist Will Fundal, and I'm non-binary. But what exactly does that mean? We'll answer some of the gender questions you always wanted to ask in our new podcast, They and Us. Listen now.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox.
What's gender identity? What does non-binary mean? Subscribe to CBC BC's new podcast, They and Us, and join host Will Fundel as they explore these questions and more. And never miss a special programming series or contest. Subscribe to CBC Vancouver's e-newsletter at cbc.ca/Vancouver inbox and keep connected with us.
Well, a newborn sea otter is in the care of the Marine Mammal Rescue Center tonight, just starting to feed after it was found orphaned and crying in a village north of Tofino.
The rescue center says it took an incredible effort to get Joey the otter, as he's been called, to safety without his mother. So we checked in with the pup and the staff taking care of him. Take a look. He's all over that though. Oh my goodness. That's so good. all over that though.
Oh my goodness.
Right?
Maybe we should. Yeah. This is not a comfortable looking position for you. There we go. What is it? Start back here. Feels like there's an office right here. We already only found one hole. That's encouraging.
Okay, he's adorable.
Quite the pampering there.
Yes, the blow dryer. Mike Killeen would like that.
Yeah, right? It's all about looking good with the hair, right? Yeah.
That's right.
Good stuff. Well, they do good work there, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Just a reminder, you can always find this newscast online at cbc.ca/BC.
And our next local news is right here at 11 after the National. And
With
I'll be
you.
in. That's right. I'll be in tonight for Dan Burt.
All right.
Have a good night.
See you tomorrow.